want to introduce about this program as well. And he's a doctor, definitely, and a senior evaluator and specialist in method and environmental and sustainability issues, several textbooks and other publications, simply countless. So we are very honored and very pleased to have Wolfgang as a plenary speaker of this IDEA 2022. So he's been prepared a good, wonderful presentation with regard to how to approach the evaluation issue in time of the Sustainable Development Goals. So the floor is yours. So we have a good 1 hour to crack. So if you speak less, we can discuss more. If you speak more, we can still discuss more. All right? So, be my guest, Wolfgang.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. And I'm really feeling honored to be invited here to visit. Also, it's only virtual Korea here. Thank you very much. And of course, yes, we will have some advertisement breaks afterwards on IPDET, because I think this could be very interesting for some people from Korea too. But now I'm going to talk about monitoring evaluation of SDGs. And just to add what Jae-sung said, well, this is something of age. So I'm a historical person in that, because I'm from the early beginning of the sustainable development ideas. I'm in this, and I'm one of those people who has really read the first draft of the Brundtland Review. So this is something which just tells you I'm getting old.
Oh my God, how old are you? You read the first draft of Brundtland?
yeah. Well, I'm now at 62, and this means, well, at my youth I read this.
Not at all.
So that's what's happening. Sometimes this is really frightening. Okay. But, well, that's just fishing for compliments in a way. So let's start monitoring evaluation of the SDGs. I just want to go through that in 4 steps. Well, the first thing, well, I excuse myself if I'm boring you a bit, but I just want to talk about monitoring and evaluation in a very brief view. I'm just getting at the point where the national state is coming in. The second one is about sustainable development. We already started with them, and then a bit more particular and SDG reporting. And finally, I will give only just 1-2 short examples for sustainability management, as it's a state of the art at the moment. So unfortunately, I do not have even a clue about the situation in Korea. So I'm really heavily interested to hear from your side about these developments in your country, because this is a very interesting point in this, that there are so many interesting and very innovative solutions which are developed at the countries, but nobody's really able to really get an overview on it. I always try, but it is almost impossible. But let's start with monitoring and evaluation, what you probably all know. So what is monitoring? To get it very briefly on a point, it is something like continuous measurement. As the World Bank said, the key question is, are we doing the things right? So we are following up a plan, and we are looking at what is development, and we think that something should change or not. Unfortunately, we have at the moment a very popular example. This is the crisis and the COVID-19. So several indicators are developed, and every day, at least here in Germany, in the news, you get some information: how many people are infected, how many people have died, how many people have hospitalized, etc. And this is pure monitoring. It's just saying the numbers. And the next thing is, of course, these data should be relevant for governance. And this example is absolutely true for that. There's a huge political and public discussion about measures which are derived from these numbers. And well, if if the people which are hospitalized rise, there's always a decision of closure, of shutdowns and lockdowns and whatever the measures are on the market. So in a way, so it is also something like evidence-based management. If you really look at the political discussions, you get some doubts if it's really evidence-based or it is just based on the personal thinking about getting into the light of the public visions and to be on a political party side. But in a way, yes, the evidence is discussed and it is used to make decisions. So this is what monitoring is about. And we always have one really huge difficulty, and this is to collect the appropriate data for decision making just in time when needed. So, of course, we also have that in the Corona example, but I think it's even more true if we come to sustainable development and to understand that there are many countries in the world which have a huge lack of data, which would be important to achieve the sustainable development goals. So we all are familiar with that. And I guess most of you are also familiar with this. But if you look at the Corona, I think it is quite obvious that there's much less of including evaluation in this process. So evaluation is nothing which is regularly done over time. So it is a selective measurement which is commissioned at a particular timing and schedule. And so, of course, first to find the rights to say, okay, now we do an evaluation. The question is, the World Bank stated it is, are we doing the right thing? So it is really a principal question, which means, okay, we have implemented some measures, and we are not sure if we really affected or achieved the effects we wanted to. And of course, we also look at some side effects and negative side effects, of course, which could also harming our results. So the data we are providing is more for strategic management, meaning so we have to decide whether we should follow up in the direction and with the measures we use, or we should really ask ourselves if these goals are the right goals, if the measures are the right measures, and if the what we can do to increase the impact we have. So this is at least the main task if it is an ongoing process, adjusting measures for achieve better impact. Footnote, of course, there are other forms of evaluation, but I just want to highlight this one. So, okay, this means we have to define the urgent questions, the right questions, mostly on causalities and impacts. We also have to find the right schedule and, of course, the scope of the evaluation. These are the main challenges if you use evaluation as an instrument. So this means we are coming to such kind of a logical model. You're probably also familiar with that. The most important impact change we had from the input, we derive activities and we want to achieve some output, and this can produce some effects, which is an outcome. And then we also think about an impact on the system of people, target groups, whatever. So this is a way of thinking in a planning process. The project management is accompanying it with something which is nowadays called project monitoring. So in the beginning, it's more performance measurement. So do we have the resources which to have? Are the activities done in time? This is observed by this kind of performance measurement. And you can find that everywhere in all kinds of projects because it's easy to collect. And it is very important because otherwise the project will not work. Nowadays, we also have a highlight on effect measurements in the monitoring process. So we also look if you achieve the output, and there's also something like an impact monitoring, which shows us merely about the outcome, not the impacts so much, but merely on the outcome, you will have some measurements in a regular form of the project monitor. And well, to take this, the guiding driving force is the intervention. So there are some planned measures we want to implement through a process in a project. So we have a plan, we have an implementation strategy, and then of course we have a lot of measures, and evaluation comes in the middle to just show us about the effects we achieved, and this might be help us to adjust during this ongoing evaluation process for the project and program. So this is merely and roughly speak what we know in plans, but now we are coming to a second step, and this is almost everywhere missing. It is a process from the system perspective, and this means from the national side. So if we want to develop our systems, let's say our health system, because of the experience we made with Corona, we have first to do a diagnosis with which kind of changes are necessary in the whole system. So for example, if we don't have enough places in the hospitals, so this is a question, what can we do? So this means, okay, we have to understand how the health system works. We have to understand what are the specific needs of the system to improve. We have to identify leverage points. This means the places where we can start to implement. If you have a system, it's not almost like that you can start at every point. For example, if you want to change the schools, it does not make any sense to talk with the parents. So you have to think about the schools and how the schools work. And then, of course, you have to talk with the people who manage schools. And then you probably have to go into the structures and the processes in the schools to understand where are probably some points where we can start to intervene. And this means to develop some measures at that point. So this is something which is outside the normal project context, but it is merely done in a let's say, very unstructured way in all kinds of projects. We are not starting without having an idea what we want to change, but there's almost all the time a systematic analysis of the systems we want to change missing. And this perspective is, of course, the perspective of a national government. And this means we need something like a national monitoring and evaluation system, which is doing that to develop the systems we are living in. So that's bring me to the first, let's say, solution conclusion part. So first and all, okay, monitoring is performance and effect measurement in a regular way. But this is not enough because we do not know and we do not get any kind of information about causalities and impacts. So this is a task of evaluation, and therefore monitoring evaluation should be linked to each other. While project management is focused on interventions, and this perspective is from the intervention onto the effects. It needs from the government side and the national side, you need to change and switch this perspective. You have to look at the systems you are working on, and you have to develop some project programs and even measures which are probably helpful to change the existing system. So such kind of a national monitoring evaluation system needs a system perspective by its own. It has to look at the health system, at the education system, at the energy sector, or whatever. So this was the first conclusion, and this is still far away from sustainable development. So let's return to that part. What is sustainable development? And I think this is very important to tell that it is more than just a set of indicators. Well, it is a concept, as I said, with a long history. It started in the early 1980s, and it started not exactly with the Brundtland Commission, but the Brundtland Commission got the task to develop this concept, and this was really the starting point. And those people who are in sustainable development may know this yellow grounded definition by heart. So the Brundtland Commission defined it as a development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generation to meet their own needs. So this is a very complex definition and a very, very difficult to handle thing. But one thing is of course already in it. It is development. There's something which should be changed over time, and it is also about resources and opportunities we have. And then up to this Brundtland report, there was a series of world conferences, almost everywhere called the Rio process, because it started in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, and several action plans from the Agenda 21 in 1992 to the Agenda 2030 in 2016, where the Sustainable Development Goals were proclaimed. The Sustainable Development Goals itself was just a follow-up to the Millennium Development Goals. And in 2012, at the Rio +20 conference, both ideas, having new MDGs and developing something like Sustainable Development Goals joined and came to this result we know today. So the goals itself was just a long process of negotiations, and the indicators developed was done by a group of professionals. But in a way, there's much more behind the SDGs, and let's say, for example, within the MDGs, which was purely such a set of indicators. There's a long spirit and ideas on sustainable development, and this means there's a poor, let's say, concept of development behind. And I just want to go through that in a very rough way. I always part it in three elements. The first one, of course, is about the integration of three main systems: of the economic system, the social system, and the ecological system. And this, there's a lot of things included in that. We should not harm the appropriate needs of the ecological system via our economic activities. And of course, people should not suffer from that, etc. It's like that. In Germany, most people talk about the three pillars. But I don't like this picture in a way, because for me, of course, first and all, these are systems. And of course, there are several arguments saying it's not only these three, there's also something like a cultural system or a political system or other kind of systems. Therefore, I prefer to talk about a horizontal integration of several social systems we have in our world, and this means we have to think about the particular needs and function of the systems. This is system thinking. The second one is quite new in a way in the development of sustainable development. So this time perspective with these generations, as said before, is a very complex and difficult picture. And therefore, there was a long discussion how to treat it. But at the moment, I think there's a quite interesting and good solution. And it's saying to, okay, we need to transition from, let's say, non-sustainable systems to sustainable systems. And it is in the picture of economy, it is something like a circular economy. We have to reduce the resources we have to input into the economy, and to make it, let's say, self-sustaining in this way. And this is how the environment usually works. And of course, this also means on the social system that we also have to provide some kind of, well, probably we nowadays call that resilient societies, and we have to protect vulnerable people. So I always take this example, which is quite usual now in Germany. We produce our energy from burning coal and gas and nuclear power, but all this means we are wasting a lot of resources just for energy reasons. And there's a great plan in Europe to increase the number of renewables and finally come to a circular economy where you only have renewable energy. So this is a long and very complicated transition process if we really in the end will achieve that. So, but this is, I think, the best idea of thinking about this, providing the future of future generation is a transition of the existing systems. The third part, I will not talk too much about this third element, although that is probably the main and mostly discussed element of the sustainable development perspective in the Agenda 2030. It is leave no one behind is, let's say, the sentence from 2060, which is most cited. But this is, from my point, it's also not complete. So I call this the vertical dimension, because this means, okay, in 1992, they called it at the conference in Rio, think global, act local. This is also not quite true, because we have, at the first step, we have to disaggregate these global ideas of sustainable development to local people. And we have to give them, at least in hand, some action plans. But this was already understood by the Brundtland Commission. This is not possible because, without including the needs and the targets and the interests of the local people. So this is also something like an exchange process. So it's not only thinking global, but it's also integrating local thinking into global thinking. But in the end, it is a process of disaggregating and distributing action plans. So I will stop here from the national to the local level. So in Korea, for sure, this is a question: how can we get the idea of sustainable development, for instance, to the people in the countryside and everywhere in the country? And this can be a real challenge, for sure. And then, on the other hand, this is also not very much observed at the moment. We have something, okay, the people are acting at the local level, but then this means if you really want to have an effect at the global level, you need some coordination and aggregation of the effects. I think this is mostly discussed in the framework of climate change. So if we want to really change the climate, it doesn't make sense that Korea or Germany or both together are reducing their CO2 emissions. We have to do it all together. Otherwise, it's just wasting the resources at one side and no effect is achieved at all. I think that's also a very important dimension. I will not talk about that in details, but I think it should be mentioned. So that's my conclusion number 2 about sustainable development. We first have to understand that it is a long-term development concept of development. It includes, from my point of view, 3 main elements. It's a horizontal integration of systems, of an ecological, economic, and social system, maybe even other more. And it is the idea of transforming these systems towards sustainability, some kind of a circle and economy idea. So this is a way of transition thinking, changing systems. And finally, yes, leaving no one behind means we have to try to get everybody on the track. Inclusive thinking, this means we should not forget about the vulnerable people, but we should also, on the other side, not forget about the different kind of interests we have in the world. Mr. Putin, by the way, already showed us that this could be very difficult. So, well, now that's a lot about theory on sustainable development, but it's not about the goals. So let's come to the SDG and the SDG reporting. I clearly think that everybody knows about these 17 goals, and I do not want to get into these details, but I'm not sure if everybody knows about the existing SDG reporting system. This is a picture done by me, getting it centered around the annual meeting of the high-level political forum. This is the most interesting institution built even before the SDGs. So there's an annual meeting in Washington of high-ranked politicians from all over the world and discussing about the progress nowadays towards the SDGs. And of course, this also happened 2021, but merely virtual now, but in general, this is really a personal meeting in Washington. There are also some side meetings on that, at that era, where also civil society or interest groups are also involved in these activities. The real meeting, so to speak, is only on this high-level political area. But a lot of activities frame these meetings. On the left side, you see the national ones. So national governments, they are kindly asked by the UN to provide voluntary national reviews and reporting about the progress on the SDGs. And the first voluntary national reviews, of course, should show a bit about the national system. I will come to that a bit later. On the other one, on the right-hand side, you see the UN system. And they provide every year a progress report from global indicators, which are shared by the UN Economic and Social Forum. This is merely an indicator report, so to speak. And finally, there's another very important report from the independent group of scientists. And this is provided in a term of 5 years. So the first one was built in 2014 and the last one in 2019. So at the moment, all over the world, scientists are meeting and discussing about new ideas, concepts, measurements, whatever, related to sustainable development and the SDGs. And this will be finally brought to a report which is presented at this meeting and which is also very influential. There are also some other reports, for example, some shadow reports from the civil societies, which are more critical because most of these national reports, at least in the eyes of some of the NGOs, are more window dressing than really progress on the SDGs. So there are also other reports and activities around that, but I will focus on these 3 main reporting systems and reports which are discussed in the high-level political forum. And these are the 3 reports. I will look at 2 of them. And first of all, I will have a short look at the national state review from Korea. This is the first one of 2016 for sure, because this is a bit about the concept and the goals. And I will also give a short look into the future is now, the scientific review. And this is a look at the Korean thing. You cannot find this graph in it, but I just want to demonstrate how Korea integrated their own activities on sustainable development with the Agenda 2030. So at that time, there was the 3rd basic plan for sustainable development, which assumedly should also be in power now. And they defined here in this plan 40 strategic targets, and this was somehow linked to 4 main political goals called healthy land, integrated and safe society, inclusive creative economy, and global responsibility. And policy targets were derived from that. And the activities on sustainable development are somehow linked to that. But of course, now we have the Agenda 2030 and the 70 SDGs. So these policy targets were also linked to the SDGs. You can find that in the review, and this is what happened in Korea. And this is what happened almost everywhere, but there's a good trial to link the SDGs and the Agenda 2030 on the global level to the activities on the national level, which of course already, some of them already exist. And you have national development plans and national ideas on sustainable development. But this is somehow linked in these reviews. And this is just to set the other side. This is not really a systemic perspective. This is offered by the independent group of scientists. And I just put out this map saying, okay, they are not talking about the SDGs at all, but they just developed the interlinkages between the SDGs and linked them to several social systems. And they find 6 entry points for transformation in a very general form. And of course, you may find the ideas of Korea there somehow in it. It is, of course, about well-being capabilities, or it is about the global environmentals and whatever. But the idea is, of course, to understand how these SDGs fit together and where are the entry points, the levers where you can start. This is system thinking par excellence. But the problem is, if you do it on a global level, it is really, well, that's very general. And I'm afraid that it was not very useful for political decision makers. So you have to transform it to the national policy level. But this is my conclusion here. Well, first of all, this is important. SDG reporting is become a national task. This is different to the MDG reporting, for example, and all the other SD activities. So now it is a clear national task, and it is linked to national reporting systems. These systems, but are still in a way not thinking in systems. So merely have a set of indicators and the discussion of each single points, and the SDG interlinkages and the system embeddedness is not recognized in this way of managing on a national level. This is really a huge challenge, and the politicians and decision makers are not used to this way of thinking in systems, and therefore we have a strong missing link here. And this makes it very difficult to manage the SDGs and to manage transition process. The data is primarily collected and analyzed by the national authorities, and therefore it is quite clear there must be something like a national monitoring. You can find that almost everywhere, but there's still a missing link, and this is the evaluation. So we need a national monitoring evaluation system. You will hear about one example, I assume, from Ian Goldman, who have been involved in that in South Africa. But he has probably also to tell you that there's not much SDG and SD in this national monitoring evaluation system. So there's still also room to improve. So, but let's come to the final point. It's about some examples for sustainability management. So I'll claim that there are many, let's say, gaps between this, what sustainable development and the management of sustainable development for achieving the SDGs is missing. But I also already mentioned that there are some very good examples. And I could also have done a whole talk about that. But I just want to give some ideas on that. The first one is from Italy. And yes, there is this IAGEG. This is the independent group of scientists. They used the metadata from this report, the Statistical Office of Italy, and they analyzed the interlinkages between the SDGs in Italy. And of course, it looks a bit different than for the whole world. And they also tried to identify some leverage point. So this was really a strong input towards this kind of looking at the system of SDGs. What's still a bit missing in this analysis is the interlinkage with the existing system. Let's say, for example, the health system or the agricultural system. But in a way, this is a small step forward to include that. So I think this was a really brilliant example of what can be done on the national level, especially in such states like Italy and Korea and Germany for sure would also be able to do so. This one is from another book. The picture is done by me. It is from some people who are accompanying in the transfer of the energy system in the Netherlands. So it is quite interesting. They have some research on that. And this is a transition governance system in the Netherlands for this sector. And I think you can learn a lot of that. It is something what you need. Okay, you have some areas where there is some transition. Let's say, for example, in Germany, we are discussing about stopping the coal mining in Middle East Germany. And there's, of course, a lot of difficulties which are linked to that. We know that in Saarland by heart, because we have been one of the famous coal mining areas before, and we had to close down 10, 15 years ago. And this, of course, is a process by its own. And something which they really included in their model is very interesting. They call it experiments. So nobody really knows what happened in such kind of a transition process if you overcome the coal mining in a region. So this means you have to develop measures which are appropriate for this situation to help those people which are negatively affected and give them new opportunities. Of course, you have also to think about the environment, what you can do to recover the environment. And of course, it is an economic problem. So this is not sure. It is a new situation, and it is a very particular specialized situation in the region. So you need something like they call social experiments. And as a result from these experiments, you can develop new measures. And of course, these measures might be able to be spread over the country. So work on a small point, like scientists are doing. We're doing experiments. We get some results out of them. We develop measure, and we envision these ideas and spread them in programs, for example. And this means, of course, we also need a monitoring and evaluation system, which is learning on that. So we still have to look at that. We have continuously observe the system effects, but we probably also have at a certain point to look by an evaluation if the process is still on its right track. So this is the idea of accompanying continuously the transition and have a governance process for that. So it's not governance because it's always also including companies and the civil society. So it is a very interesting example from my point of view to look at this Netherlands part. Of course, it is not primarily and directly linked to the SDGs, but of course, this is the ideas of getting into a circular economy towards renewables. So this is just a small element. But if you do it in a national perspective, you probably have to do several such kind of procedures of management systems. And this is what I want to end with, to envision it a bit on the Korean case. So we already talked about the transition goals. I just take the first one, healthy land. This is a nice say. I'm sure nobody will say, okay, no, we need an unhealthy land in Korea. So it's easy to say, but everybody assumably will say, okay, we are living in a beautiful land in Korea, but it's not a healthy land as it should be. And this is what's in this review and what's in this third plan of sustainable development. So there are some envisions, there are some ideas, some thoughts how it should be idealized working. And if we really want to work hard to achieve these, this means we have to develop a national monitoring evaluation system. And to start on the evaluation side, because I think it should start with an evaluation. And this evaluation is just a system analysis. So we have to understand why the country is not as healthy as it should be. So where are the reasons why it isn't perfectly working as a healthy land? And therefore, we have to identify causal relations, which are the driving forces which harm the system. And this means we're detecting some needs for action. And we also have to detect some risks which are probably associated with that. Sometimes it seems quite easy. Oh, okay, we can do this or that. Then, of course, it may end up with a catastrophe. So to take it very actual, Mr. Putin probably has really detected some important needs in the system of European security. But I'm not quite sure if he really calculated all the risks which are associated with now this military occupation of Ukraine or parts of the Ukraine. And this is, of course, what you have to do if you really want to change the system. And this is, of course, if you want to change the security system in Europe, you have to think about that carefully. Okay, healthy land again. This means this would be a starting point. And then, of course, we have to develop a monitoring system which is observing the changes we detected as important. We have to, of course, we have to set goals we want to achieve at a certain time. And we have to measure if these goals are achieved or not. We have also to find some solutions to observe the functionality of the systems, which give us some ideas about if the system is working. And we probably also have to develop some indicators which give us scenarios or prediction how it will develop. And then at a certain point, we probably also need, again, some kind of evaluations. So it is not one evaluation. So it's several kind of different forms of evaluation. One catch-all evaluation would really be overloaded, and it will not come in time. And of course, we do not have one indicator which is following the monitoring set. We have to develop a set of indicators. And this is a systematic way to develop that. I think in the monitoring part, we already have something, but most monitoring systems I know, they are merely linked to the idea of that we should measure it easily. So it should be a cheap measure. And this sometimes brings us off the road. And this is, for example, CO2 is one very good example. Climate change is now almost all linked to CO2 as an indicator. And if the European Union, for example, now declares the nuclear power as sustainable, this is just a joke. Of course, it is not. It is not a renewable energy production. It produces a lot of waste. And of course, it, as the Japanese probably know by heart, and the Ukraine too, it produces a lot of risks. And I don't want to imagine if such a thing like in Japan would happen in my region. So a few kilometers away, there is a French nuclear power station. So yes, there are risks. They need some resources, and of course they produce waste. It is not a circular economy, so it is not sustainable. But if you just focus on CO2, you can say, okay, there's not much CO2 coming out of the nuclear power station. So other things coming out. And this is just what Michael Patton called silo thinking. I really love that, because you stay in one idea, CO2, and you just manage towards to reduce CO2. But in the end, you may produce much more harm than you really get positive effects, because you overlook side effects, other emissions, other problems, other difficulties, which are not linked to this silo where you're in. So therefore, you need a system approach and a monitoring evaluation system, which is combining it. So this is the end of my presentation. It's just to be a bit too long. It's what I already said. National governance is not an intervention orientation, it's a system perspective. And the system of SDGs must somehow be integrated into the existing governance systems. And there are a lot of good solutions. Although the one in Korea is quite nice and easy to understand how it is done. And sustainable development needs to be really manageable and national monitoring evaluation systems. And there we have a lot of difficulties. We do not have such a system in Germany, and we will never have one. This is due to our political system. I'm quite sure. I'm really very negative about that. But there are other countries which are really hardly trying to develop such national monitoring evaluation systems, as I already said. And Goldman can tell you a bit about that, what the solutions in South Africa are. And of course, these national monitoring evaluation systems in the context of the SDGs should provide information on systems which are in a transition towards a resilient and sustainable society. And this means this must be defined, this must be developed, and this must be very systematic. The monitoring, which is merely set as a set of SDGs indicators, is not appropriate. We need such more systemic perspectives. Just looking at SDGs indicators just tell us, okay, we achieved them or we did not achieve them. It doesn't say anything about the system difficulties, the transition. So looking at the infection rate for the coronavirus does not help us at all to provide and to make our health system to be more resilient. And this should be the point where I stop. Thank you for your attention. And I'm, of course, open for a lot of questions we probably derive from that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wolfgang. We expect a lot of questions as well. And you open a very important issue on the importance of national evaluation system, which will be followed by Ian and Candice tomorrow as well. And especially in Korea, you have made a very good observation, possibly too positive on the Korea's SDG evaluation system as well. In this regard, I think Professor Kim Tae-jung has something to say with regard to that. Can you turn on your microphone and say something? Ask a question. Yeah, Professor Kim. Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor Kwok. Danke sehr, Herr Dr. Meyer. I have already uploaded my requests and questions in the chatting window, but let me briefly go over them. The first is a request. I happen to miss the part of your presentation on the feedback part of the circular loop chart. You go through the M&E system, and then you go over the feedback part of the loop in the logical models and M&E systems chart. And I didn't get your explanations about the parts starting from change, system needs, and so forth. So my first request is to go over, if possible, about that part of the explanation one more time. And my substantive question is about what we should do in a country like Korea. I think we have a fairly robust monitoring system for policy implementation and tracking of outputs, and I think such a system has served the nation so far quite well, because South Korea has been mainly playing the catching up game, right? So I think there was a consensus that what is the right thing to do for the nation at a given moment in time. And the main problem we faced in public management was to find out whether we are doing the things in the right way, right? But in tackling the SDGs, we are operating in an uncharted territory, and I think it's very important to develop a system of robust evaluations. And I am worried in that domestic policy arena, we don't have the system, we don't have the resources, we don't have the pool of expertise, we don't have the culture yet for extensive, robust evaluations. And I am wondering what would be the point of developing an elaborate system of monitoring. So in response to the SDGs, South Korea has developed a system of K SDGs together with the sectoral targets and indicators. And I'm pretty sure we are going to do a good job in checking out, how much progress we are making along the way. But it seems to me under the current system that we have, it'll be very hard, if not impossible, to find out what other things we should be doing in case we find out we are falling behind the schedule. So I wonder whether you have some pragmatic examples to point at, for us in South Korea to look at and learn from. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Well, these are, of course, a big question, so to speak. Well, let's start with the easy one for me, with this, the feedback loop. I think it is quite interesting. If you look at all kind of programs, I think you can do that mainly all over the world. Well, yes, there are some ideas which are derived at the ministry to develop some kind of intervention programs. These intervention programs are developed, and then, of course, it is more or less a political scene, and then the program is run. And of course, monitoring evaluation, I think that's probably the same in Korea. In Germany, it's now, of course, regularly. All these projects will be evaluated in one or the other way. I don't say it's all the time good evaluations, but they are. And of course, they all have some kind of a program management, and they all have program monitoring. And in the end, then they stop, and that's it, and the program is finished, and the next will start. And then sometimes somebody is coming to us and saying, okay, just do an evaluation about what happened in the field, an ex post evaluation. And almost all the time, the people are disappointed, because all these programs have vanished without or with little and much less causes than you really expected. And this is, and now I'm coming to my pictures, this is because of the missing link. So if you really want to improve, for example, the health system, I took this example, then yes, at the moment we can think, okay, it's quite good. Now we have to develop some measures to for example, to protect the poor people in the old people, for example. So we have an old people protection program or something like that. But we didn't look at the system. So how are the old people living? What are the circumstances? And do we really need this kind of measures we developed for all old people? And are these measures really working? This might be something which we are controlling in this first part. So the problem is, if you look at the health system and the situation of old people and the risk factors, then you may come to solutions saying, okay, these are the leverage points. These are the points where we have to intervene. There we have to develop measures. And this, of course, brings us to a point to start. And this loop, in a way, is missing. And to develop that, of course, you need something. Of course, you need monitoring data. You need information. If you do not know about the situation of the poor people and about the virus, you're blind. So, of course, you need a very good and exciting working monitoring system. But you also need some kind of a system analysis. And this means also some kind of a continuous evaluation of this process of the development of the systems. And of course, a country like Korea and also Germany, for sure, we have a lot of scientists. This must not be a task of the government. I'm not sure if they are really able to do so. It's our task in a way, yes. But of course, this means we must be supported to do so. This must be something which must be built up. So this is what the National Monitoring Evaluation System means. Like the statistical office, and I'm sure it works very well in Korea. You have a long tradition in doing so, as we have. And you have also a long tradition in good educated statisticians, and this works in a way. But you also have some adding in the evaluation. So it could be, I'm not quite sure if it should be, but it could be somehow linked to the statistical offices. But it could also be to, let's say, CD or some organizations at university. This is also possible. It could also be more open on the market for consulting companies. This depends, but you need a concept on the national level to do so and to add evaluation. And the perspective should not be on the project and programs. This is already incorporated. Shortly coming to that if there are some missing links. But on the other side, you also need something on the management of the system, especially if you really want to transform these systems towards something new. And this is probably also coming to the good examples, which are also very difficult. I think for two reasons it is very difficult. One reason is a very, let's say, national cultural. As you said, there's a quite typical culture of handling evaluations in Germany, and this is surely totally different to the one in Korea. It is very interesting that we have a certain agreement on what evaluation is on a global perspective. But if it comes to the national use of evaluation, then you find huge differences. And this is not the responsibility of the evaluators, but of the culture of the country and also of the culture of political use of this instrument. If I talk about Germany, I would say, okay, there's one point, there are too many politicians which are afraid of evaluation. So sometimes they do not even use the word evaluation. Or to take it very short, politicians like to evaluate, but they do not want to be evaluated. This is a problem. But therefore, it's very difficult to transfer such kind of examples. But I think there's a lot of good ideas at the moment in the SDG field. And I'm really surprised by which kind of countries where you find a lot of activities. I don't say the solutions are really perfect, but you find it very interesting to think about that. Just to give such kind of an example. So for me, the forerunners at the moment are countries like Costa Rica in Latin America, very small country. Madagascar in Africa. I had to look up on the map where it is, but they have developed some very interesting ideas how to do a national monitoring evaluation system. You will hear from in Goldman, because I think South Africa was also quite good in that, but the results are not yet that good as they should, from my point of view.
That's interesting.
And the third one from Asia at the moment is Nepal. So I didn't have to look up where Nepal is, but it's very interesting that at that point, I didn't get in touch now with some people from Nepal. I really am keenly interested, because there's a lot of, if you look at the documents, there's a lot of discussion about how to integrate monitoring and evaluation in the national reporting system. And you see, the people are thinking about that. And this is the first step. And therefore, my recommendation for Korea would be, you have to sit together and think about what you can do with your resources, with your people, in your culture, to go beyond the state you already are. And of course, if there's anybody like me or others in the world which could help you, I'd be very, very honored if you invite us to join.
I mean, KDI may be taking a leading role in inviting all those stakeholders and sitting together and think about the evaluation system all over again to facilitate your understanding a little bit more. we have a really good national governmental evaluation system in Korea. It's too good. So there's not much room for change, and it's well structured. All the departments and ministries and commissions, they have their own inputs, outputs, evaluation systems. By the end of a year, every department generate hundreds of pages of the evaluation, self-evaluation report to be evaluated by outside advisors, evaluators. And problem one is only 1 year cycle. And year 2021, and we've done this A to Z on 2021. When it comes to 2022, they reformat everything and they start all over again according to the budget cycle. But now we all know input, not important, output, not quite important, outcome, increasingly important, impact, very, very important. That's what we are learning in the world of evaluation. But in this game of Korean government evaluation cycle, outcomes and impacts are completely disappeared. We only focus on inputs and outputs. And they repeat this all over again. All those government agencies spending hell out of money. And there's not much of a room for SDG concepts embedded in our evaluation system. So really, we need a good roundtable for discussion. Yeah. We need in the Madagascar case, we need a South African case to learn more about that.
Costa Rica too.
Well, I think that's really very interesting. But so I just have the first advertisement break here and saying, okay, what we are doing at the moment. Well, already we had the second book on the market. This is a project done by Reinhard Stockmann and me. It's about the globe, we call it. It is about the institutionalization of evaluation in the world. And we already published a book about Europe. And we published now, yesterday I received the first copy from the Americas book. And at the moment we are working on a book on Asia. Of course, we have somebody from Korea in it. And it is very interesting. So it is just, we are editing this and we are kindly asking people from the countries to report on a systematic guideline developed by us on the institutionalization of evaluation in the political system, in the civil society, and in the professionalization of evaluation in the countries. And well, just to add to that, the situation you described here is quite similar to what happens in Switzerland. So they have a huge and wonderful developed evaluation system, a good culture in evaluation, but now it's coming over to a point where it's getting over bureaucratized. So it's just something we are doing, making a hook on it, and it's not more learning, it's just administration. And this is also dangerous. We had to learn that. I think the Swiss case was really one of the most interesting one in the European book. And for sure, yes, well, you kind of look at that, and of course, I'm very keen to see what will be the results from Korea there in it. So this is what we know, yeah.
Okay, now Wolfgang, we have a long queue for you, and I wonder if you had the chance to read those questions. So, I mean, one by one, where we may want to answer those questions. I mean, if Sonny or Dirk or Munsu, you want to turn on your microphone and say, then you can go ahead, or the Wolfgang just read and answer the questions. They're all related to VNR.
Yes, okay. I would suggest, well, because there are also some hands at the moment, I want this directly, and then I will go through all
Professor
and try. Yes.
Good evening. Hello. My name is Moon, actually, from Busan University of Foreign Studies. Actually just echoing what Hoffman says. I'm actually very confused between this global process of VNR and this voluntary reporting systems in SDG implementation from European countries. because in the era of MDG, all the so-called developing countries was sort of have a mandate to report MDG progress. But now in the era of SDG, you are voluntarily report, right? And I have noticed that in a global process, UK, USA, all these big shots have no interest in whatsoever to contribute in SDG process. But I have noticed that Finland, Sweden, Germany, and a few European OECD members are every year contributing in Vienna process. So I'm wondering at the global process and national process, is there a consensus in Germany that you continuously want to do be a part of the Vienna process? Or is Vienna process is influential enough for German stakeholders to sort of, there's a bit of global push for German stakeholders to respond to that?
Well, I may answer this question adding this from Mr. Hoffman to that. I think it's quite clear. Well, yes, this one thing which we did in the context of EVOL SDGs at the very early beginning. The first voluntary national reviews, the nations were back to say something about their reporting systems. And Benoit Simon, he was from France, he was the initiator of that, has a wonderful idea to have a look at all the voluntary national reviews which were published at that time. And we made a follow-up, it was in 2016-17 and 2017-18, we made a follow-up on that. So we had the first rounds of this, and this is published I will bringing the links a little bit later. Of course, I'm not used to that at the moment, but this is published openly in the IAD paper series. So you look on that, and then you get an overview. In general, you can say not much happened on evaluation at that time. And there's also a new paper now done by Dewal, which I can also give the link. About the situation of the voluntary national reviews in 2021. So this is a brand new paper, and there are some countries. Well, the regular modus of reporting. This is one of the questions you had. This is really very different in countries. There are some countries which are reporting every year, but this is a small group. So Germany had now 2021 the second of their voluntary national reviews. This was planned as it was done. So we had a revise of our national sustainability strategy, and we also promised to report on that. And this was done in 2021. The first one was offered in 2016. So I can say a bit about that because there are two things to say. The first thing is Germany sometimes has this image to be the first. And so 2016, this review was, as a German, I would say, a mess, because it was too fast, too quick, too much oriented on the existing stuff. And they did not really, it's not a good report. Compared to all the others we've seen, it is it's not the worst one, but it is not one of the good ones. But the process now implemented, I'm rather fine with it, because there was, it is linked to the national sustainability strategy, and this also has a regular modus, and there was a consultation process which takes some time. All the ministries were linked together. There was a lot of discussion about things, and if you look now at the second voluntary national review, you have to say it is really a huge jump forwards. There's a lot of new elements in it, and they are coming from the civil societies, they are coming from the internationals, and they are coming from the development. One thing I found very important, which is associated with the strategy, that there was a peer review process. So the minister president from New Zealand was in Germany, and he checked the German sustainability strategy, and they gave recommendations, and this was really important. Well, it was, of course, it was nice and a nice level, but there was a lot of interesting comments, and also the critical comments. They were heard because they're coming from outside, from somebody who's looking at that at the same position. I think this was really important. This was a truly good idea to include that in this process. And of course, also some consultation process. There was also a lot of things which coming in. So this is how it developed in Germany, and I'm quite fine with that. Also, I'm still very critical about the results. There are still room to improve, but it's quite good. But something is missing in it, and this is still evaluation. And this is a difficulty, I say, in our system, because this is something, the task of the ministers. And so the Development Cooperation Ministry has a very huge development. Therefore, we have the DEVAL. They have an institute around that. So there's a lot of thinking about evaluation there. But this is totally different, for example, in the Education Ministry. They also have a lot of ideas, but it's totally different system. And if you come to the Health Ministry, you'll probably also find some ideas about how it should be evaluated. So you do not have a national monitoring evaluation system. You probably have a national monitoring by the statistical office, but not an evaluation system. This is still a lack in Germany, and I have my doubts that it will work. Mm-hmm. So if you have a more centralized state and another form of politics, then of course it may be easier to develop such things.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Zhang? As we have not much of a time left, would you like to
yes
continue
yes thank you again for the great presentation, Dr. Meyer. My name is Ji-Sun with Korea Institute for International Economic Policy. I was wondering whether there has been any discussion, progress, or effort to evaluate the coherence or maybe incoherence between the national level effort and international level effort, mainly through development cooperation at maybe Germany level or European Union level. For instance, maybe lack of linkage between your migration policy or your, policy toward refugees or IDPs or et cetera and et cetera. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think that's the usual way of doing it is just setting off programs and then to accompany them with monitoring evaluation in sectors. And in development corporations, the situation is almost a bit more difficult because you have partners. And then, of course, it's a sharing of interests. In general, we still have the donor organizations, let's say it's the GIZ or the World Bank, and they are interested in doing their project, and of course they want to know how their programs works. And they have developed very delighting and wonderful monitoring evaluation systems in their context. But this is still, the other side is still missing on the national level. And many countries, I think that's because of this, the people are coming and they are doing projects, let's say, for migration policy. So that's something which we are doing in Germany at the moment. We are sending a lot of money to Africa to provide African people coming to Germany. Okay, and then of course, on the German side, there's a lot of interest to know, okay, does it work? Does the people stay there? Did they get new opportunities? But the problem is, this is just a German perspective. The perspective of the countries where the people are living might be totally different. I don't say, oh, they are all corrupt and they just want to take the money and run. But for sure, maybe in some countries, it is not that bad if some of the people are going, because they are not able to handle it. They are poor. It's very difficult. And it's nice if the Germans are coming, but this is not solving the problem from their perspective. They need much more engagement. And I think that's a problem in the development cooperation sector, that there's still on the partner side a lack of monitoring evaluation on the national perspective. But saying that, this is not true at the end, because there's a lot of initiatives to increase this kind of evaluation capacity building. So DEVAL, for example, and before that, GIZ, they were very active in Central America. There are also other activities like, well, tomorrow with South Africa, you will see that IHE, from the World Bank, the independent evaluation group, was very active to support this kind of development of national monitoring evaluation systems. And I know from GIZ, for example, they were very active in this area of climate change to develop national monitoring evaluation systems. So a lot of activities. And at the moment, GI is a global evaluation initiative, namely Jos Wessen. They are trying to make a stock taking about all these initiatives in the world to understand more about the needs of training and support for building up national monitoring evaluation systems. So there are a lot of activities, but in the end, this is still the problem. So it is still the Western world and who is coming to these countries with their own ideas, but the activities and the interest of the other side, partner side, must be involved. And this is still a challenge. This is different, of course, if you just talk about your health system in Germany. There's also some interlinkages in Europe that maybe it's better to be an island, Korea. But I think this is easier to treat than you have to treat it in this international cooperation.
Okay, Wolfgang, would you like to say some words about the discrepancy between government and civil society's perspective or reports on certain issues, as Sunny asked, with regard to the VNLs? Are they different? Any room for contamination by stakeholders? Definitely should be different. But from your perspective, how do you observe the difference?
Yeah, well, first and all, I have to mention this. Well, this is a result from our globe. So for most of the authors, it was much easier to write about political systems than to write about civil society. This is because of the heterogeneity on one hand side, but also because, let's say, it's really strange. In general, in politic issues, the civil society is a driver and they are pushing the government. And in evaluation, it's the opposite. So it has really taken a time, also in Germany, that the non-governmental organizations start to understand that first and all, evaluation is an instrument for themselves, and they are really still poor in using it in a political way to say, okay, you're doing this kind of, let's say here, the Corona programs. So proof, does it really work? So there's a lot of debates about that in Germany at the moment. But it is really a stupid debate because it's far away from evidence. So, but there's no force, as far as I know, which is really saying, hey, government, you want to have a lockdown, and you say it works. Just prove it. Where's the proof? And this is a task of the regionally of the civil society. And this is very interesting that evaluation is seen from the historical reasons for sure at the civil society as a threat and not as an instrument by their own. This is still underdeveloped almost everywhere. There are some countries where it is a bit better, even better than in Germany, but I think it is a slow start to understand that evaluation is not only an instrument, a control instrument used by governments against the civil society, but it could also be used by civil society as a political instrument to prove that the government work is good or not, and to be critical about that. So therefore, I think the shadow reports, for example, it is very, I really highly recommend to look at the shadow reports from some countries, because this is also something like a show of what civil society is doing in evaluation. In general, you can say it is more towards the target people. It is more qualitative in methods. It is more participatory in the approach. But it is unfortunate to say that less in a scientific quality.
I mean, definitely we need 1 or 2 hours to discuss about that. But I see some countries like Denmark, they have integrated model, the national policy and NGO participation well blended together. They're working together, designed together, and then probably evaluated together. So we have this ideal model, but however, in most countries, I don't think it will happen. Cats and dogs.
Sure, there are some very good examples. And I think the Scandinavian countries are always very interesting in that because they have a different kind of culture of working together, even between civil society and government. I think that's also interesting. In Germany, it's still something like, okay, the civil society is a bit the watchdog of the government, and the government feels as a watchdog of the public money which is spent in civil society. And it is getting better, but it is still something like that. And if you look at in Sweden, evaluation was just implemented around the difficulties and the problems, and the society is more, we are one family, we have to solve the problems. Therefore, it is much easier to include that. How is it in Korea? Maybe it's more that way.
Maybe we are like more Germany. We are more like Germany. Bang. Okay. We are heavily like overtime right now, but quickly, would you like to say something about your experience in training the evaluators from your university or the IPDET or so whatever? And then let's wrap up.
Okay. Well, this is an advertisement part 2. At the moment, right now, the application process is open for scholarships for IPDET. So we will have this year, we will surely have an on-site session in Bern. So we are really planning to do that. We hope it will work. At the moment, the development is really good. The Swiss government decided to open. We are still a bit careful at the moment, saying, okay, the problem is, of course, getting a visa to come to Bern in the end, yes. So if nobody knows what will happen in half a year, but at the moment, we are optimistic. But for sure, we will have this on-site meeting. In the on-site meeting, there will be 1 week core course. It's for beginners in evaluation. And the other course is for the advanced people with special topics. You can find them on the www.ipdet.org page. And then we have also some virtual workshops. So I will do again one on the monitoring evaluation of the SDGs. So if you don't get enough from me, you will have get another load if you want to. Scholarships, the scholarships are of course for people from countries from the global south. So I'm afraid that South Korea is probably not, well, but it depends. There might be some reasons why not, but I think you have to cover the costs by your own. It's more for people from Africa or from other Asian countries. But well, it's also possible. But at the moment, you can, of course, apply for that such kind of support, which is, of course, I think very important if you really want to come to Bern. So it's a question of, that's really costly thing. Yeah? And for the on-site workshops, of course, yes, it costs also money, but I think this is affordable if you are not really a poor person from some African or Asian countries which are really poor. So this is at the moment open. It will close, I think, somehow in April or end of March. And so feel free to look at IPDET. The other thing, it's my own advertisement, 2A, so to speak. So we have a Master of Evaluation at Saarland University in cooperation with close to our area, Leuven University in Kaiserslautern. The Americans call it K-Town, it's easier to pronounce. And this is just an offer to all people from all over the world. So we have really people from everywhere. And it is derived from our German Master of Evaluation, which is existing for 16 years now. And it is just a short introduction into the methodology of Master of Evaluation from various sides. It is a blended learning course, which means you have to come 2 times to Germany for 1 week. Unfortunately, this was not possible because of the Corona thing, but this is the idea. So we all meet once here at the beautiful castle, probably, and all the other time it is just e-learning. And this is, we will open that in a few months. So it's already now at the moment where you can get information about that. I can also share that the web contact if you are interested in that. So this is what we are doing here in Saarland. And
I mean, if you just send us any additional information or contact, I will be sharing with the conference participants here.
Sure. Yes, I probably do it better that way, because if I really want to go through all the chats, it will take some time. I just probably take a copy of that, and then I will send the answers to you.
You can click bottom right, so you can save all the chats.
Yeah. Okay.
I want to express my thanks to Dirk Hoffman, probably your sniper, to support. And then he casted a lot of information and links as well. Thank you very much.
Okay, great.
And also, thank you so much, Wolfgang, and for sharing all those insights and information, such a rich information that we can have here today. So, thank you, and see you soon.
Yes, of course. If there are any questions, please do not hesitate to get in touch with me, for sure. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Okay, thank you very much.
Beautiful edition now in Korean language.
Yeah, so we'll be continue our conference after 10 minutes break. We will start at 9:10, but will be delivered in Korean language. Okay, see you at 9:10. Thank you, Wolfgang.